I was standing near the reception desk when the screen refreshed. Global 7500. Status: prepping. The terminal was quiet in the way expensive places are quiet. Not silent. Controlled. Shoes on stone. A tablet tapped once. Then again. Mark Ellison stood behind the counter with his shoulders squared to the room. Station manager posture. He held the tablet low, angled away, like the data was for him alone. 2 security guards stayed just off the metal detector. Feet staggered. Hands open. Not touching anything. I noticed the manifest on the auxiliary monitor before anyone else did. It was open. No one was reading it. She came in carrying a flight bag that had seen airports older than this building. Leather worn smooth where hands grab it most. Water darkened the toes of her boots. A jacket hung heavy in the rain. No badge clipped outside. No uniform visible. Mark didn't look at the manifest. He looked at her shoes. He slid the visitor badge tray forward with one finger, not lifting it, just nudging it across the marble. The tray stopped short of her hand. "Deliveries don't wait in the lobby," he said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She stopped where the floor marker ended. Didn't step closer. Didn't step back. "I'm checking in for the Zurich flight," she said. Her voice was even, not apologetic, not challenging. Mark's eyes flicked past her to the bag, then to the jacket, then back to the tablet. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask for credentials. He didn't touch the manifest. When she said she was the PIC, he let out a short breath through his nose. Not a laugh. Something smaller. He turned his head toward the nearest guard without looking away from her. "Can you keep an eye on her bag?" he said. "Liability issue." The guard took half a step. His hand hovered near his belt. Not on it. Close enough. Nothing in that exchange broke a rule. That was the problem. Mark straightened and finally looked up. "Wait outside under the awning," he said. "We'll call you if needed. We're friends." And I watched him shift the tablet to his other hand and step away from the counter. His thumb moved across the screen. A call. Not to operations. Not to crew scheduling. "Security." She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She adjusted the strap on the flight bag and turned toward the doors. Through the glass. The rain came down harder than it looked from inside. Wind pushed it sideways. She stopped just under the narrow overhang, pulled her phone out, and turned her body so the screen stayed dry. Her hand made a small roof over it. Inside, champagne was poured for someone who hadn't arrived yet. A linen was straightened. A door closed softly. The status on the screen didn't change. Minutes passed without anyone saying they were passing. The terminal held its breath. A black SUV rolled up outside. Then, another. Doors opened. Umbrellas bloomed. Thomas Caldwell walked in like time was something he owned. Mark was already moving before Caldwell crossed the threshold. Tablet up. Smile on. I saw Mark close the auxiliary monitor too fast. The manifest disappeared. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," Mark said. "Apologies for the delay. Minor staffing adjustment." 9. Caldwell didn't respond. He looked past the desk, toward the glass. That's when he saw her. He stopped. Not fully. Just enough to change the room. He said her name once. Avery Collins. The security guard looked at Mark. Mark didn't look back. Avery stepped inside again when Caldwell gestured. Water traced a line from her jacket to the floor. No one offered a towel. Mark opened his mouth. Closed it. "I can't access the aircraft," Avery said. Her voice carried. "But barely. You initiated a security call." Ostub. No accusation. Just sequence. Mark's tablet chimed. Once. Then again. Under protocol. She continued. The pick is restricted from the tarmac until it's resolved. Einself. The words landed and stayed where they fell. The screen still read, prepping. No one touched it. I realized then what had happened. Not to her. To the system. Mark had used a process to push someone out of the way. The same process had now pushed everything else to a stop. No one argued. No one apologized. Outside. The rain kept falling. Inside. Nothing moved. That was the first moment I understood this wasn't about a seat or a jacket or a bag. It was about a system that only knows how to do what it's told. And someone had told the wrong thing. The screen refreshed again. Global 7500. Status unchanged. No one announced the delay. No one needed to. Time was doing it for us. Mark Ellison stood closer to the counter now. Tablet pressed flat against his palm. He kept his shoulders squared to the room. But his feet had shifted. The guards hadn't moved. They didn't need to. Outside. The rain thinned into a steady sheet. Through the glass. I saw the woman under the awning tilt her phone. Then her hand. Then her body. Keeping the screen dry without stepping forward. She didn't pace. She didn't check the door. Inside. A staffer adjusted a linen that didn't need adjusting. Another checked the temperature of the champagne that hadn't been ordered yet. The delay had begun to cost something. But no invoice had arrived. The SUVs rolled up without ceremony. Engines off. Doors open. Umbrellas out. Thomas Caldwell entered as if the building had been waiting for him. Mark's posture changed before Caldwell reached the desk. The tablet came up. The smile arrived late. Minor staffing adjustment. Mark said. Caldwell didn't answer. He looked through the glass. I followed his gaze. So did the nearest guard. Caldwell took 2 steps toward the doors and stopped. Not fully. Just enough to interrupt the room. He said her name once. Avery Collins. Creus. No title. No explanation. The sound of it landed differently than everything else had. Mark didn't correct him. No one did. She stepped inside at Caldwell's gesture. Water traced a clean line from the hem of her jacket to the floor. No one offered a towel. No one asked for a badge. Mark opened his mouth. Closed it. I can't access the aircraft, she said. Her voice stayed level. Like she was reading from a checklist. You initiated a security call. Avery life. Mark glanced at the guards. They didn't look back. Under protocol. She continued. The PIC is restricted from the tarmac until it's cleared. Ode, no emphasis. No appeal. Mark lifted the tablet and tapped once. The tablet chimed. It didn't solve anything. Caldwell checked his watch. Not for time. For confirmation. How long? He asked. Mark answered too quickly. Minutes. No one believed him. The auxiliary monitor came back on when Mark shifted his weight. I saw the manifest again for half a second before he angled the screen away. The name sat there. Already where it belonged. Outside. The rain didn't matter anymore. Inside. It did. A staffer approached with a question and stopped short when Mark raised a hand. The hand shook. Just enough to notice. I need operations. Mark said into the tablet. There was no reply he liked. Caldwell didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Is the aircraft available or not? Mark swallowed. He looked at the tablet. Then at the guards. Then. There was a woman standing a step inside the threshold. She can wait, he said, choosing the word carefully. We're resolving it. Tane. The woman didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because you called it in, she said. There's a record. Until it's closed. Nothing moves. Oh, the room accepted that the way rooms accept gravity. The status on the screen stayed the same. A call came through on Mark's tablet. He answered it with his back to the desk. His voice dropped, then tightened, then flattened. When he turned back, the smile was gone. Caldwell nodded once. Not to Mark. To the situation. Clear it, he said. Mark stared at the tablet as if it might argue back. Outside, the woman checked her phone and slid it back into her jacket. No rush. No pause. The system had reached the point where it could only do one thing. Follow the process that has been triggered. No one said it out loud. No one needed to. I understood then that the delay wasn't accidental anymore. It was procedural. And procedures don't care who asked for them. The lights in the cockpit went dark first. Not all at once. Panel by panel. Someone near the desk stopped mid-sentence. No one finished it. The auxiliary power unit fell silent, and the jet settled into a stillness that didn't ask permission. No alarms. No raised voices. Mark Ellison stared at the tablet as if familiarity might wake it. It didn't. On the wall monitor, a new email preview slid into view when the system refreshed. Subject line only. Notice of default. No one read it aloud. No one needed to. The guards adjusted their stance at the same time. Not forward. Not back. Just enough to reset. Thomas Caldwell stepped closer to the counter and placed his palm flat on the surface. He didn't lean. He didn't smile. He waited until the room stopped moving. Then he spoke once. You initiated a security restriction without verifying the manifest. Writers. The sentence landed and stayed where it fell. No one answered it. No one tried to improve it. The tablet chimed. A different tone. A status banner replaced the one that had been there all morning. Access pending review. Mark looked down at the tablet. Waited for it to respond. Then lowered his hand when it didn't. The auxiliary monitor flickered as the manifest refreshed. Names scrolled into their assigned places. Lines aligning the way they always had. Nothing dramatic. Nothing new. A staffer reached for a cart and stopped when the screen updated again. Another subject line appeared. Administrative hold. The guards shifted. This time in sequence. One stepped aside from the counter. The other cleared a narrow path toward the side corridor without making eye contact. No one touched anyone. No one needed to. Outside. The rain thinned and then stopped. Inside. It didn't matter. Two men in dark jackets entered from the corridor and paused just inside the threshold. Badges visible. Hands empty. Mark straightened. Then hesitated. Unsure where to stand now that the counter no longer anchored him. He checked the tablet once more. It stayed quiet. A printer behind the desk came to life and produced a single page. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. It didn't need to be. The CEO arrived after that. Too late to intervene. Early enough to understand. He scanned the wall monitor. Then the jet. Then the paper that had been placed face down on the counter. He nodded once. Nothing else was required. There was a conversation. It stayed procedural. Signatures. Dates. Transfer language. No one mentioned the jacket. No one mentioned the rain. The agents guided Mark toward the side exit. The same one he had pointed to earlier that morning. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. The door closed behind him with the same sound it always made. Nothing ceremonial. Just hardware doing its job. The guards returned to neutral positions. The cart rolled back into place. The linen was smoothed where it had been smoothed before. On the wall monitor, the flight status changed. Prepping. Avery Collins wasn't in the room for any of it. I noticed her absence when a chair was pulled back. And no one sat down. When the discussion turned toward timelines, no one corrected them. She had already left the building. Not hurried. Not announced. A draft of clean air entered when the door opened for someone else, then disappeared when it closed again. The room reset itself. The jet waited. The system caught up. If you stayed to the end, you saw how power actually moves when no one raises their voice. If this kind of story matters to you, stories where systems speak louder than people, leave a comment with what you noticed. Share this with someone who understands process. And subscribe to Black CEO Tales for more quiet outcomes like this.